big ask and its extension, but we didn't get it last time. Anything in terms of encouraging FDI for that matter, for the gift city, through the gift city? What are the corporate sector's expectations?
So so I think first of all, let me just say that I agree with what Mr. Kanabar and Mr. Bhutani said. In terms of the expectations for the Aam Aadmi as well as for the manufacturing company, I think this is a big ask. Everybody is expecting that 15% concessional rate for the manufacturing should come in this budget. I also think that it's not just for the new manufacturing companies, but even for the existing companies, we should look at, let's say, some kind of an investment allowance or some incentive if they want to expand their existing manufacturing facilities, which we used to have decades ago, where, let's say, if I invested into the new facilities or I expanded the existing facilities, in addition to the depreciation, I would actually get some kind of an additional deduction of about 15%. Now, something similar can be looked at, in my view. Also, in order to encourage, let's say, R&D expenses or, startup, innovation, etc., some kind of a weightage, deduction should be considered. Now, coming back to the FDI, FPI issues, etc., I think, looking at the volatility in the market, I think there is two expectations. Right. One is the capital gains tax rates. I know that there was a complete change in the regime, but I think people are expecting, or people believe, that the tax rates for both long term and short term are little on a higher side. So maybe we should have some reduction there. Also, the STT, looking at the buoyancy in the collection of the STT and the capital gains, maybe there is some expectation that some kind of a rate reduction in the STT should
Got it. Well, if they decide to roll back a bit on long term and short term capital gains, then we'll have a working Sunday as well. It'll be a huge headline. I don't know if that comes true or not. But gentlemen, thank you for this sort of a quick take. We do have to take a break because the finance minister has now proceeded to enter parliament. But we will come back to you as those announcements start trickling in. I think Shireen has the next set of guests with her as well. Shireen, over to you.
Going to be coming in just a second, Surabhi. Live from here, the CNBC TV 18 headquarters, we'll be joined by industry leaders from the Confederation of Indian Industry. And it's important there to pick up on the messaging that's being sent out by the tax advisors. Will they tinker with the capital gains rates? Remember, it was changed just last time around. So I don't know whether they are going to want to move so quickly or let the rates settle at this point in time. But of course, relief for the middle class, that's the big ask. And we'll take that conversation forward. We've also got with us our guests from FICCI joining us now. Let me go across to Anant Goenka and the FICCI president. Gentlemen, many thanks. The countdown has begun. The top three things that you believe the finance minister will deliver on, not wish list, what you believe they will finally deliver on. Anant, let me start by asking you.
What is the time now?
Anant, can you hear me? Well, we seem to be having... Harsh, can you hear me? Is my voice getting through to you?
Yeah, I can hear you now.
Yeah, very quickly to both you and Anant, the time for wish list is over. What do you think the finance minister will deliver on the top three things?
Sorry, can you repeat the question, Shireen? We couldn't hear properly.
Yeah, what will the finance minister deliver on, Anant and Harsh? Anant, let me start by asking you.
Yeah, so I'd say the first three things that we're looking at. One is a budget of continuity, continued investment in capital investment. The second is focus on how do you do ease of doing business. And the third is putting some money in the hands of the consumer.
CapEx and consumption. Harsha, what do you believe the finance minister is going to send out by way of messaging and signals to revive and unleash the animal spirits?
I think, from the government perspective, they will focus on the continuity. We have seen in the past, they have been quite consistent in their overall budget. And this time also we expect that the capex expenditure, which has the multiplier effect, will continue, and we hope that the government increase their spend in that. As Anant was saying, consumption is a bit tepid. So how do we increase and help boost the consumption? So that is certainly, we hope to see some steps from the FM on that front. And also in the area of manufacturing, Make in India, in the area of PLI scheme, I think, we hope to see some activity there also.
Yes, more perhaps with regards to the PLI schemes. But Anant, let me come back to you. You did a survey of your FICCI members ahead of the budget. What's the mood, both in terms of hiring, in terms of capacity enhancement, in terms of current capacity utilization? I mean, how strong is sentiment today? Where does business confidence lie ahead of the budget?
But I'd say there are two parts to the survey. I'd say one is clearly there is more positivity on the rural side. On the urban side, there is some concern. However, I think as growth comes in, capacity utilizations go up, we are looking at an increase in private investment. I think the challenge on private investment has largely been on the consumption side. So if we can just add a little bit of sweetener out there, it'll make a big difference.
A little bit of a sweetener on the consumption side. Harsha, what is the expectation as far as tax relief is concerned? Realistically, what are you hoping for?
See, I believe, some kind of tax relief, especially at the lower end of the people, of the income group, that will certainly help boost the consumption and put in more money in the hand of the consumers, which will certainly help in the discretionary spend. So we are very hopeful, and to see some kind of steps there. And also at the corporate tax level, if they at the government level, at 15%, we expect to see something there as well.
Well, the return of that concessional scheme, which was phased out in 2024, we'll have to see whether that makes a comeback or not. Harsh and Anant, many, many thanks for joining us here on CNBC TV 18. We'll check back with you once the budget is delivered. But for now, the market's holding steady. Hero Moto under pressure today on account of the management changes, the CEO resigning there. The finance minister has arrived in Parliament ahead of the budget. It's 190 points higher on the Sensex, and the Nifty trending at 23,500 plus. So we will take a quick break and return with Voices from Industry. The Confederation of Indian Industry joins us right here on the CNBC TV 18 budget headquarters after this.
All right, thanks for that, Shireen. Let's dispense with the break and go straight away to our economists. We are joined by Sabaran Chakrabarti, the chief economist for City India, and Sajid Shenoy, head of Asia Economic Research at JP Morgan, also a member of the PMEAC, of course. Sajid, Sabaran, thank you very much for being with us. Sajid, yesterday Anant Nageswaran was very candid. He said you can't expect the government to cut fiscal deficit, add to capex, and do welfare spending. So what do you think they'll do?
That's exactly right, Lata. I think when there's so much clamor about stimulus, it's important to understand the macro backdrop here, that fiscal deficits are coming down. And I think the government's been very good about fiscal marksmanship. So, when they say they want to have a deficit at 4.5% or below, I take them at their word, and I expect to see a 40 or 50 basis point of GDP consolidation. The question is, how will that be achieved, right? Will that be achieved on the revenue side, or will that be achieved by rationalizing expenditures? And my sense is that, with CapEx, the good news is December CapEx grew very strongly. So hopefully the undershoot in CapEx that had been feared for this year will be less than expected. But the CapEx story is an important one. I would expect for it to grow at least in line with nominal GDP, right? So you want to ensure that CapEx to GDP is at the same ratio.
So 10% over 11.1.
Well, the 11.1 may not be achieved because I think despite a strong December number, the asking rate for the next 3 months is still 55% growth year on year to get to the 11.1. So we may be, 10.5. But on that base, I think nominal GDP will grow at 10.5% like it has last year. So you'd expect to see CapEx grow at least 10.5%. This then introduces interesting trade-offs, because if CapEx to GDP is not falling, where will you get the reduction in the fiscal deficit? Some of it happens because other expenditures, defense expenditures, interest expenditures, don't rise in line with nominal GDP. Subsidies should not rise in line with nominal GDP. So there'll be some savings there. But the broader point is it involves trade-offs here, that if you want a tax cut as the market is clamming for, then some revenue expenditure has to be cut and vice versa. I'll make one final point. It's important at a time where there's been some slowdown in growth that we get maximum bang for our buck from the fiscal. And fiscal multipliers tend to be higher on the expenditure side than on the tax side. So really what you want is not to compromise expenditures that are going at the bottom of the pyramid because those multipliers are higher. But these are the delicate trade-offs the budget will have to contend with.
Then you're clearly not the middle class's favorite, Sergeant. There is a lot of expectation.
I think a targeted tax cut is okay, but the space is limited.
I take your point. But no, Samiran, do you think Reserve Bank dividend can make a big difference? 2 lakh crore again is a reasonable expectation?
Yes, I mean, obviously, as we were discussing, Sajid was mentioning that there are no free lunches. So clearly, somewhere you have to get an additional source of revenue from. In the last year's budget, RBI dividend provided that source. This year also, the number could be very large, and it could make a difference between these marginal changes that are expected in different things. Like, say, for example, we are estimating that the income tax cut or the tweak could be somewhere slightly less than 0.1% of GDP. So that can get carved out of that additional RBI dividend. Because the other source that economists have been suggesting for a while now, which is increasing significantly the divestment revenue, that does not seem to be the path that the government is walking because of certain market conditions. So that way, the scope for increasing expenditure or tax cuts gets limited. Yes, RBI dividend will definitely be watched very, very closely.
Samiran, they did not walk that path on divestment when the market was in the most charitable mood also, right? But that's a debate for another time, another day, perhaps. I just want to go back to that capex point and ask you, gentlemen, that, you know, they started the year budgeting it at about, I think, 3.3% of GDP, right? Now with the slowdown, maybe they end up at 2.9% or 3% of GDP. Going forward, while, of course, Sajid has put forward the absolute expectations, the numbers for FY26 and, 10% in line with nominal GDP growth, as a percentage of GDP, would you expect capex to continue to trend at those high levels of 3.3% or so, given what the economic survey is urging yesterday? Economic survey is saying, the government has done its heavy lifting, its bit of the heavy lifting. It's time for the private sector to move up. Now, will that at all show up in the numbers in any way? Samiran?
So my sense is that the capex to GDP, public capex, central government public capex to GDP will not fall. But what is investors are increasingly looking at is exactly on what kind of things the government is spending. There is a perception that on the traditional sectors of roads, railways, defense, it's difficult to get that kind of high growth rates of 10 to 15% year over year, because there will obviously be some issues around whether the government will be execute them. So would there be some diversification of capex into other sectors like urban development, housing, R&D, water? That's one sort of a discussion. The other is that if the government is not doing divestment and PSUs are becoming strong, would we see the PSU capex number to go up? If you recall, last few years, PSU capex have been coming off. This PSU capex has been going into the central government capex. So if we see the PSU capex number to go up, then the overall government capex actually will look much better.
All right.
Okay. I have an overarching expectation. I mean, all of us have this economic policy framework. Samiran and Sajid, the promise was that she's going to announce something now which will kind of, cover for the medium term. What are you all expecting? Sajid first.
Today is going to be outside the budget math. There's so much focus on the budget math, but the short point is fiscal degrees of freedom are constrained when you're reducing deficits by 0.5% of GDP. In fact, Lata, what you said, I think, are the more important elements. The July speech spoke not just about an economic policy framework, it spoke about working with the states on, on structural reforms. It spoke about reimagining the financial architecture. It promised to review on basic customs duties to rationalize import tariffs. It spoke about, making the income tax code, much easier to navigate. I'll be looking at continuation on that. And I would, I think the economic policy framework is important because this is the first year of a third term. We've seen overnight tariffs in the US may well go up on Mexico and Canada and China today on February 1st. The global environment is much more hostile. The economic survey spoke about that. So the framework will be a really important document to lay out a path for, in this global environment, how can India get 7% growth? Where should the policy emphasis be? One last thing I'll say, remember, we're forgetting that employment was the overarching objective of the July budget. And it'll be good to get a scorecard on how those employment-linked incentives and internships are done. Will those programs be tweaked? And what will be the budget allocation? So I think there's a lot of very important signals that will come in the budget speech outside of the fiscal math, which is much more constrained.
No, absolutely. We didn't hear anything about those employment. They were going to take up the EPFO and ESI part of some people employed under 15,000 rupees, etc. Though it's not been operationalized. But Samiran, economic policy framework, what should we expect?
So if I take the economic survey's main message to be the driving principle behind the economic policy framework, then it's clearly going to focus on deregulation. There is a huge positive externality that can come out of it. We have all talked about it in the past, but probably never in such a strong and clear way, that how important this is in driving productivity, not only productivity in general, but in particular, it affects the small and medium enterprises the most, who are trying to build up their businesses. And that's where it is also important to understand that the whole employment debate that Sajid was referring to, that larger part of that employment happens in that space. Also, the fact that we often talk about India not being able to do as much labor-intensive exports and doing more of high-tech exports. Part of the reason could simply be that the cost of setting up business is so high that the lower margin businesses do not stay competitive. It is only the higher margin businesses which stay competitive. And that could be the reason why the economic policy framework would focus more on deregulation, ease of doing business, and that can cut across all factor markets, land, labor, etc.
All right. Gentlemen, thank you very much, both of you, Sajid and Samiran, for joining us with that perspective as we head into the budget. But not a long wait now, another 40 minutes and we'll have the budget speech, at least beginning. Now, 50 points on the Nifty, so it's kind of holding on, waiting for that. And we'll have more on the other side. Up next, we will connect with our voices from India Inc., Sanjeev Puri, Rajiv Memani, R. Mukundan, Vinayak Chatterjee. So they'll all be joining Shireen from the CII Budget Headquarters.
Well, here's a fallout of the DeepSeek phenomena. The Indian IT Minister Ashwini Vaishnav making the big announcement that the Chinese large language open source model DeepSeek will be brought to Indian servers, will be brought to Indian shores so that it becomes available to Indian users. Sounds simple? Well, not quite. A lot of jargon there. What does it actually mean? Let's help you break this down to understand what really has transpired with this announcement being coming from Ashwini Vaishnav. Now, let's assume, and I'll explain that with the help of an analogy, the analogy of the humble tea, the common denominator between 2.8 billion Indian and Chinese. Now, for example, let's assume that DeepSeek is this Chinese tea in this cup of tea. Now, what's important is that this is an open source AI model. What that effectively means is that the core code, which is the heart of the model, which is the recipe of the Chinese tea, is publicly available. So what the Indian government is proposing is that we'll use this recipe of the Chinese tea and replicate it here on Indian shores, on Indian servers, and have exactly the same model here present in India for Indian users. But that's not all. Let's bear in mind, we like our masala chai, like most things in life, we like a little tadka in our life. So we'll add a little input to this. We'll add some components. We'll add some sugar. We like some sugar in our tea. We'll definitely add some ginger. We like ginger as well. And let's not forget the milk in the Indian tea. And having done that, we'll come to the finished product, which of course is a humble masala chai, is a humble cutting chai. So why are we doing all of this? Why is Ashwini Vaishnav doing all of this? Well, the long and short is, number one, let's not forget the obvious out of the way, which is the masala chai tastes a lot better. But having addressed with the obvious, the other two key components why the Indian government is doing is number one, all the components that we added, the sugar, the ginger, the milk, what that essentially represents are tweaks that Indian engineers will be able to do on Indian servers to this DeepSeek model. Now, why would we want to do that? But let's bear in mind, there were niggles with DeepSeek when it initially came out. It wouldn't accurately answer questions about, say, the 1962 war or the status of Arunachal Pradesh. So this masala chai, with all these components, represents tweaks that the Indian engineers will be able to do on the Indian servers so that it becomes slightly more comprehensive. But the second and perhaps a larger concern that the government has is that the government doesn't want you sipping tea from the Chinese cup of tea, as that will leave your imprint. And by your imprint, I mean your data with the Chinese servers. What the Indian government is essentially saying, let it come here and have a cup of tea from the Indian cup of tea, the Indian server, so that your imprint, your data stays safe within Indian shores. So this Chai Pe Charcha is the long and short of why the Indian government is bringing DeepSeek on Indian servers to Indian shores.
Welcome back. You're watching our continuing coverage. We are counting down to the budget. 30 minutes to go for the Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman to rise to present her 8th budget. It is a record number of consecutive budgets delivered by a Finance Minister. We're here at the Confederation of Indian Industry. Joining me now, Sanjeev Puri, Vinayak Chatterjee and Rajiv Memani. Gentlemen, good morning. Many thanks for joining us. Sanjeev Puri, let me start by asking you, CapEx, consumption, consolidation, what will the Finance Minister prioritize?
I think very clearly, like has been in the past, I think the focus will remain on inclusive and sustainable growth, and that growth through improving productivity of the economy, investments in the economy through public capex. And given the softness in consumption, we do believe there will be some relief provided to middle class by way of either income tax or reduction in duties on petroleum and so on and so forth. So we expect a combination of that, but the thrust of earlier budgets of increasing competitiveness of the economy, the productive capacity, I think that will certainly continue.
You know, on consumption, Sanjeev, and I based this on the question and the comment that came in from the Economic Affairs, the Chief Economic Advisor in his interview with me, when I asked him that how concerned is he about consumption, and he said that, look, we don't believe it's a structural problem. Rural economy has started to show signs of picking up, and we have seen a revival there. Urban is hurting at this point in time, but we don't believe that the consumption issues are a structural problem today. How do you look at the situation?
You see, ultimately, I think consumption is under pressure because of cost of certain items, particularly, the food inflation has been sticky, and that's so because of climate change. And because of that, I think the wallets are stretched. The other thing that stretched the wallets is the higher interest rates. There's a study published also which shows the share of EMI in a consumer's wallet has actually gone up. So there is stress, and that's why I think we are seeing consumption being a little soft. Once these factors are dealt with, and we do expect the interest rates also to moderate in February. Yeah, of course, that has to be preceded by liquidity injection, which has started to happen. Yeah. And both of this should provide relief, and I think some relief in the form of income tax or petroleum products. That will provide the
But
much
any
needed-
indication of volume growth picking up? And we certainly saw that with Nestle's numbers yesterday. Any indication of volume growth picking up?
Well, rural is doing picking up. Rural is picking up, but urban is still flattish. That's the general sense we have.
Urban flattish at this point in time. Vinayak Chatterjee, the bucket man, returns here on CNBC TV 18. How many buckets do you have for us? 7 buckets.
I prepared them because I knew you'd be pulling my leg, you know. So I said, Shireen's going to say that.
It is tradition. We can't let go of it.
Yeah. Anyway, I have 7, but I'll concentrate on the top 2. If there's time, I'll run through the balance 5. The real issue before the budget, Shireen, is the tension between controlling the glide path of fiscal deficit versus using infrastructure outlays to pump prime the economy. This is the ultimate tension in the budget. Now, the real question is, where is the Honorable Finance Minister putting her finger on this continuum? Now, last year was a disappointment because after many years of 30% growth in the infra outlay budgets, if you remember the past years, 5 lakh to 7.5, 7.5 to 10, they were all 30% increases. Last year, we got only 10% growth. 10 became 11.1. Now, this year, what is the range within which she can play? I mean, if it's going to be as conservative as last year, then we are not going to get infra to pump prime the economy and the slowdown and the capex. And if you get only 10%...
But the government's point of view is that that's not conservative, that is still a pretty high capex number, and it's now time for the private sector to also pick up the baton.
Well, government expenditure in infra leads private capex there. So the government, and remember, the government itself is touting the figure that 1 rupee spent on infrastructure results in 3 rupees of GDP, and 1 rupee spent on direct benefit transfer kind of expenditures results in 90 paisa of GDP. So the maths is very clear. If you want infra to pump prime the economy, particularly now when there already talk of slowdown in capex, slowdown in GDP, then where are we going to see the FM put her finger if she's going to be aggressive and go for a 25% increase in the infra outlay, then we are going to get 14 lakh crores as the budgetary outlay over 11.1 last year. And if she's going to be conservative, then we are going to get 12 lakh crores. So I'm keen to see where the government takes a stand. And the second point, and I'm going to stop very quickly after mentioning this, last time there was a hint in her budget speech. She said that the core infrastructure areas have reached a certain level of maturity and self-sustainability, which is largely transport and energy. And then she said other sectors of the economy now require attention. So I'm also keen to see in her budget announcements this time the interplay of the outlays between core and social infrastructure. And social meaning health, education, agriculture. I'm stopping here. The balance 5, if we have time.
Yeah, I'll come to you very quickly for the balance 5 in just a second. But 12 to 14 lakh crores, that's the range that you're working with this time around as far as capex is concerned. On the tax front, you know, if she needs to deliver on the range that Vinayak Chatterjee has just articulated, how much room does she have to do more than just provide sweeteners on the tax front?
Yeah, on the tax front, my view is that at least on the personal tax side, you know, last 3 years, Shireen, the growth in personal tax revenues has been more than 20%. So at least on the personal tax side, and if you have to provide some fillip to consumption, and also from an equity standpoint, given the way lower income and middle income people have been hit because of inflation and other things, I think the government should provide relief at those levels. So I do believe that the government will be providing relief. What's the extent of relief? I think that we'll have to see. And you're right. I think that I think the fiscal glide path has to be maintained.
But do you think that they'll move on the rate and the slab, or do you think that will be more by way of exemptions?
No. I think they will go with the new tax scheme.
Yeah, absolutely. On the new tax scheme, bring in exemptions, or do you think that move as far as the rates slabs are concerned?
No, there are 3 levers. Either there is the tax rebate, so you can move that up. Standard deduction, then that impacts everything. Or you move the slab up that the peak rate, which comes at 15 lakhs, you know, that moves up slightly. So I don't know which they'll apply, but my sense is that the rebate amount that is there, they may increase that because that gives relief at that level, and a little bit increase on the standard deduction side, because they won't want to tamper anything that changes with the number of people who are filing tax returns, because that's been one of the reasons that they want to track that number very closely.
On the corporate side, we saw changes as far as capital gains were concerned. The expectation is that given where the markets are, maybe they might provide a fillip by a cut. Do you expect that at all?
No. It may happen, but I don't expect
anything?
I don't expect. I think also if you see, Shireen, this government, they have not made too many, if I compare them with the earlier budgets, where you used to have lots of changes in tax. Now you have limited issues. So the direction is pretty clear in the way they want to go at it. So I don't anticipate too many changes. I do hope that they present the new tax draft income tax act to be opened up for discussion and also be probably to put place in front of the standing committee. And then that will lead to real simplification. So a lot of the tax issues may be around simplification.
Simplification, yeah.
And on corporate tax side.
That's the indication.
Yeah.
But on this business of the global context and responding to the global context under Trump administration, the threat of tariffs today is probably going to be the day where we see the first set of tariffs being imposed on Canada, Mexico, and perhaps even China. But Sanjeev Puri, from a manufacturing standpoint, from an FDI standpoint, what's the expectation, not just in terms of signaling, but also in terms of tangible steps? What do you expect?
So, this is a very difficult situation in the global context today. And therefore, we have to put in a lot more focus on the domestic drivers of competitiveness, which is what the chief economic advisor also alluded to. So focus on competitiveness on sectors where we can really win and become a global hub. Second is, I think, this business of tariffs or the complicated tariff walls that are emerging. This has been happening in the past, and we are seeing more of it happen. So really, we will have to really progress on FTAs. I think that's a way out, and use that route to integrate with global value chains. And the third is, I think, while it's not to do with tariffs, but there's also an issue of excess capacities in certain geographies that are dumping stocks all over and therefore limiting opportunities. So we have to deal with that unfair competition. We need to have an agile response. So really in three parts. I think one is to focus on sectors where we have potential, where the world has potential. And some of it we spoke about also yesterday. Second is FTAs. And third is really to have agile responses to this issues of dumping. That's very, all these three are critical for
Anything
manufacturing.
specific on the Make in India agenda, bringing back the concessional scheme for manufacturing units, perhaps some allowances even for corporates to expand existing units and so on and so forth. Anything there on Make in India 3.0?
So look, anything concessional is always welcome by industry.
But is that?
I'll really, if I was to really put it down, let me say that the balance sheets of corporates, the balance sheets of the financial system, they're in strong position, right? Corporate income tax rates were rationalized in the past. I think the big things to deal with right now are ease of doing business, cost of doing business, flexibility in labor regulations. A lot of it fall in this, in the ambit of the state. It's to provide specific targeted impetus to sectors that are labor intensive. See how we can pump prime agriculture even further. And this is the sector that the economic survey spoke about.
Absolutely.
To deal with the issue of resilience, because that feeds into inflation and then consumption.
It's interesting to see the mood here in industry is measured and tempered when it comes to things like, reductions or allowances or further incentives to India Inc. And that's because the survey made it clear corporate profitability has been at a 15-year high. But of course, the situation is looking a little bit more challenging now in terms of that, but a measured response. One final bucket before I let you go, and we'll toss it back to Bombay. Vinayak.
Final bucket would be a policy statement, long overdue, of a reduction of the 28% GST on an Aam Aadmi product called cement, which everybody considers irrational.
But it cannot be part of the budget. So
it can be part of a budgetary policy announcement. It's going to spur cost effectiveness in infrastructure. It will help Aam Aadmi, and it cannot be equated with pan masala, cement.
No. And there's a lot in that 28% bucket that needs to be addressed, but the budget perhaps is not going to veer into the GST territory at all. That will be for the GST Council. But gentlemen, we will check back in with you on how much of this is actually delivered by the Finance Minister. As always, many thanks for joining us here at the CNBC TV 18 Budget Headquarters. Guys, it's back to you.
All right, Shireen, thank you very much for that. That's an interesting discussion, and there is a lot going on in the markets as well. I mean, just sort of anticipating, there are lots of moves, individual moves. How much will be validated, of course, is the question we'll have to wait and watch out for. That's a 0.25% higher for now, as far as the index is concerned. Kiki Mistry is with us, former Vice Chair and CEO of HDFC. Mr. Mistry, it's always great to have you on an important day like the budget, as you've been with us in the past as well. So great to see you again. Just 20 minutes to go and we'll have the budget speech starting. Visuals are already coming in, the finance minister in the parliament, and those are live visuals which are coming in as we speak. We'll stay with the visuals, but Mr. Mistry, let me ask you, top of mind, 2 or 3 things in terms of, I mean, there are lots of asks, but in terms of real expectations, what would those be?
I would say growth, focus on growth. Second is focus on job creation. Third is leave money in the hands of people for consumption, to improve consumption in the economy. And the fourth, if you ask me, would be some reforms for the capital market. Capital market reforms.
Well, capital gains tax, I doubt they'll touch, will they, Mr. Mistry?
I don't know. I think some kind of, if we could have some kind of consistency in the tax rules, it would help a lot.
Can you be a little more specific? What could be your ask?
I'm saying if you were to say that the capital gains, the maximum, the capital gains, long-term capital gains now is going to be 12.5%.
Yeah.
And that is the way it's going to be for the next X number of years, rather than keep, shuffling and making changes.
That's possible because she's also promised an economic policy framework announcement. So it's possible that something long-term will be announced there. But Mr. Mistry, let me come back to your own love, housing. I don't know when with the new tax regime, whether specific incentives can be announced for higher interest, higher principal set-offs and stuff like that. But overall, can housing expect something?
I think housing should expect something because housing is a big employment generator.
Yes.
And we know that employment, creation of jobs is such an important facet of the budget. So there are certain policy decisions that could be taken. Like, for example, if there is a PME 2 scheme, we had a Prime Minister's Awas Yojana Scheme 1, which was extremely successful 5 or 6 years ago. Did very, very well. Now, if we were to have a PME 2, and that stretches to urban areas, then I think that would be a huge help to, to the housing sector. Also, digitization of land records will help the rural economy. So there are many things like that can be done. Like take, for example, rental market. In India, we look only at people staying in the house, but in the Western world, a lot of people buy property with the idea of leasing it out, renting it out. Now, if you rent it out, the interest that you pay on the loan is capped at 2 lakh rupees, which, is not going to make too much of sense. So that limit needs to be removed. There are things like that can be done, which could be done for the housing sector without interest rates.
Got it. Just to tie in that point, you were about to say something on capital gains. Did you want to add something?
I wanted to talk about dividend. I mean, it's a long-drawn topic. We've talked about it multiple times. But if you really look at it, the dividend is getting taxed twice. The company is paying 25% tax on the dividend that it pays out because it's not getting a deduction on the dividend that they pay. And the individual is paying tax on dividend at the marginal tax rate. So if your tax rate, for example, is 30%, you're paying 30% tax plus 25% tax paid by the company. Now, plus, of course, the surcharge. So if we were to say that we tax dividend at the maximum marginal tax rate applicable to individuals, which currently is 30% plus surcharge, then the tax on dividend should really be curtailed to 5%. So then you're still taxing dividend at the maximum marginal tax rate.
Yeah.
Okay, Mr. Mistry, on capital gains, I think because it is at 12.5, right? It's the thing. I think that is the number. It's the 10, 15, or maybe it'll go to 15. You're not expecting a reduction, right? I mean, you're saying just clarity. Just
clarity that it will remain like this. I don't think I expect a reduction.
No, last year, there were a lot of people who were saying 12.5 looks like such an unstable number. Will they make it 15? You don't have such fears, do you?
I don't. I really don't, because I think we've seen a lot of middle income and below middle income people now investing in equity markets. And if you want to, I mean, already we've seen some pressure on equity markets in recent times. So in my opinion, I don't think there will be any change.
In terms of the economic The report yesterday, a survey, also kind of alluded to it, right? Taxes have been cut in 2018-19 from 35 to 25%, and the CE exhorting corporates to come in, participate, invest. Is there anything of that which kind of shows up in the budget in some way? I don't know how, but will that message be felt through the budget?
I think so. I think if we are to get growth into the system, but basically the idea is to create jobs. So how do you create jobs? You invest, you create more capacity, whether it is in infrastructure or in other industries. So some incentives for creating that extra capacity is something which I think is very, very much possible.
Okay. All right, Mr. Mistry, I hope they're listening. There's hardly any time, not much time for tweaks at least, but these, of course, especially the dividend point you're making, has been made, and let's see whether we have heard. We'll speak with you after the budget. Thank you very much indeed for joining us today. Okay, the market's in the green, so clearly there is some kind of an expectation. To be fair, of course, positions were also light. So let's get some final words from top stock market experts joining us now. Sandeep Bhatia, the Managing Director, Head of Equity India at Macquarie Capital. Dinesh Kanabar will be with us in a bit, the CEO of Dhruva Advisors. And we will also have Mahesh Nandurkar, Managing Director and Head of Research at Jefferies. Mahesh, Sandeep, Mr. Kanabar, thank you very much. Sandeep, what's the sense? I mean, have you bought or have you advised buying something before the budget in expectation of some sectors getting benefited?
So, the budgets are a lot of hype. Most of the times it's a big show when very little go. So it's not that we would say that buy this for the budget. I think as most of the panelists before me echoed, the corporate sector has done structurally well in terms of profit and margins and cash flows. The banking sector is strong. The one part of the economy actually which is not done well is the household sector, and especially the middle income and poorer households. So I think if we see impetus to consumption, that itself will spur private capex, what we have not seen for some time, and we may not see if demand doesn't come back, is private capex. So I would be very happy if there's a spur to consumption. That's what I would expect from the budget. There is very little space otherwise to do something major. Given the fiscal glide path we are on, we need to control our fiscal deficit and gross borrowings. But definitely the surcharges which have been imposed and which need to go away, we can have some concessions there.
In what way? You said a boost to consumption you like. In what way, Sandeep?
Well, raise the minimum, the level at which tax starts coming in. So make it about, let's say, 1 lakh a month, 12 lakh, something like that. That would mean that if you're earning less than 1 lakh a month, you're not paying any taxes. So something like that. Plus, let's see if they can do anything on employment generation, incentivize corporates for employment generation. That is definitely needed. In my discussions with various senior economists of the government, they have noted the fact that the headcount growth has severely lagged behind the profit and earnings growth in the corporate sector over the last 7 to 10 years.
And the economic survey also mentions that the CA made that point yesterday as well, Sandeep. So in what way? Because further incentivization.
Yeah, I think there would be some way of saying that if you don't create a certain number of jobs over a period of time according to your top line growth or something, then your tax rates could go up. I think it has to be done very, very carefully because that can create more bureaucracy. But at least a push towards more formal employment will be necessary. I hope it is done without doing much damage. So I think some kind of a conversation also is important, and that has started.
Okay, actually, on that same point, let me get Mahesh Nandurkar in from Jefferies. Mahesh, do you think that we should and will get any stimulation for consumption?
So first of all, I would like to say that we are still in the fiscal consolidation mode. From the post-COVID era, we have already reduced our fiscal deficit by more than 400 basis points. But I think each year, even from here on, and specifically in FY26, we would be looking at a 30-40 basis point reduction in the fiscal deficit. And given the fact that the revenue growth is unlikely to be more than 10% for the government of India, my belief is that the total expenditure growth is going to be, say, around 8% to 9% kind of mark. So that's the overall constraint within which I think we will have to view our expectations. So I think that the government has already done a lot of heavy lifting on the capex side. In the last 5 years, the capex has grown 3x, and it is quite natural to expect some kind of shift in that, away from capex growth into consumption growth. But I think overall the limitation is going to be 8 to 9% total growth. So in that context, however, the government may like to give a big boost, but I think it will come with its own limitations.
Okay, all right. Mahesh is well put. Sunil Kaul is with us as well, Global Emerging Market Equity Strategist at Goldman Sachs, who's with us. Sunil, let me start by asking you, there is a lot of expectation that there could be further focus on public capex. Your report, though, says growth pace for capex is now behind us. What is your thinking and what are you expecting?
No, I think that's right, because, I mean, as we know, the government actually increased capex spending at a rate of 30% CAGR between sort of calendar 21 to 2023, those 3 years, and took the fiscal spending as a percent of GDP from 1.5 to north of 3%, 3.2, 3.3%. So there has been a lot of fiscal spending that the government has done in prior years. And our strong view, even coming into last year, was that those growth rates are unlikely to sustain. And so the government will reduce the spending on fiscal more in line with nominal GDP, which is what they announced in the last budget as well. But I think this time also we'll think that the allocations to fiscal spending would be in line with sort of high, sort of low double digits of 10, 11%, which is in line with the nominal GDP. So they will effectively keep the fiscal spending as a percent of GDP somewhat constant at around 3% of GDP.
Yeah, absolutely, Sunil. And that view really stands out because you're not expecting a decided uptick, continued uptick in the capex spend. Mr. Kanabar, coming back to you now, we discussed the big expectation on income tax earlier, but I want to move beyond that as well. Aside of that, what are the other major things that you would watch out for? There's been so much of a clamor for simplification, for reducing litigation, the TDS regime, TCS and TCS rates. Would you expect anything else?
So even if I think the issue really is the cost of compliance, and the cost of compliance is just going up and up and up. And when we spoke earlier about TDS and TCS, the question is it really doing any benefit to have such a lot of litigation? And coming to litigation, I think the issue really is that today we have a backlog in the tax department, which is enormous. So just at a first appeal level, you have almost a 5 to 6 year waiting, which is unheard of, and which has not been there for the last 15 years. The first time we are seeing such a lot of backlog, which essentially means that if there is an addition at the tax office level, the tax office collects 20%. The taxpayer believes he is out of pocket with that 20% unnecessarily. And should the taxpayer actually lose out, the government is out of pocket on 80%, and you can't have this situation continuing. A number of suggestions have been made in this regard, whether one can go directly to a tribunal, whether more cases can go to DRP. And I'll be waiting with bated breath to see what comes out of it. And those are very, very welcome things.
Okay. All right. On the rates per se, on the multiple TDS rates, just in 10 seconds, Mr. Kanabar, what are the changes you'd expect?
So the point really is that you have a tax rate for salaried employees, which is equal to their income, so that they don't need to file a tax return. Then you have a higher TDS rate for lotteries and crypto and whatever else. Then all the other TDS, can it not be a one simple rate, so that one is not really litigating with the tax office as to what is the applicable section? Should the withholding be at 2% or 5% or 10%?
Okay. Well, let's see what comes. Sandeep, well, finally, at the moment, what is attracting you in the market?
I think at the moment, one should look. So my assumption is that we'll see some tax cuts. So I think we can look at beneficiaries of tax cuts. I think to that extent, Maruti looks interesting in the near term post budget. If we do see a tax cut, small cars have been lagging. We all know that. At least sentimentally, these tax cuts can help. But there's also a pay revision commission, which has been announced by the government. Pay revisions will come through next year. So I think Maruti looks interesting at these levels. Other than that, it comes down to what happens in geopolitics. We have Trump and Modi meeting each other in February in the White House. I do expect some kind of a mini trade deal to come through. It's difficult to play this, but I think the Indian pharma sector is generally a beneficiary. So if we don't see any disruption, we definitely like Sun Pharma. So that's something. Otherwise, the private sector banks, I think the banking sector is a consensus call. I don't claim any special insight here, but some of the beaten down banks, such as Axis Bank or IndusInd Bank, could definitely look interesting because the system stability is definitely very strong.
Okay. All right. We are just about less than 10 minutes to the budget. Gentlemen, thank you very much for being with us. Shireen, last few thoughts from your guests.
Yeah, Lata, actually, we're 4 minutes away from the finance minister rising to present the budget speech. We've got our budget editors with us, Atanu Chakrabarti and Rathin Roy. By the way, there's a multilingual conversation happening here between the two of them. There's Bengali, there's Gujarati, there's Marathi. So I've been enjoying this multilingual budget banter that's taking place here with our budget editors. But Mr. Chakrabarti, to the point that was being made there, from a banking sector's perspective, from a financial services sector's perspective, what are you looking at the budget for?
Frankly, the major thing which really matters for the banking sector today is the savings, household savings, which have been eaten into by inflation. So most of the bankers would be looking at the fiscal deficit number and whether the debt containment happens, as I'd mentioned yesterday as well, this year, and maybe reduction possibly next year even. And the glide path, I wish, is even steeper, but at least glide path is followed. That will send the right signal for inflationary expectations. That will improve the savings. That doesn't eat into the wages. People would be willing to invest, increases wages across, improves savings, improves even velocity of money. That's what bankers look at.
Well, speaking of the velocity of money, if we get that rate cut, first of all, do you believe we're getting a rate cut in February? If we do get that rate cut, do you expect that this encouraging signs of a pickup as far as private capex is concerned, that's likely to get a leg up?
Frankly, people would go by, because there are different benchmarks that bankers use. And if inflation is low, most of them have pegged their rates either to 2-year bonds or 5-year bonds. So there the yields would come down and the rates would properly settle down. Whether rate cut itself would transmit into that or not would depend upon, frankly, the rate of inflation.
On the global scenario, Rathin, and we were just discussing this, President Trump and Prime Minister Modi expected to meet. There is the possibility of some sort of a move ahead as far as a mini trade deal is concerned, etc. Do you believe that this budget is going to address, at least signal, anything on that front, on the global scenario? Is it likely to address even what's happening as far as the rupee depreciation with respect to the dollar is concerned?
I don't think so, because that's not the job of the budget. However, I think that I would expect the finance minister to at least comment on how India will navigate what promises to be a very turbulent year in terms of our bilateral and multilateral relationships, as the economic survey highlighted. So getting an endorsement of what the economic survey said, which is skillful, negotiated progress on the international front, would be important. And foreign investors will be looking more or less for the same kind of reassurance that Ratanu was saying domestic investors will be looking at. You want a steady hand, you want a lower fiscal deficit, you don't really want to see any particular need to increase subsidies, and you want tax cuts to be moderated and not paid for by increased fiscal deficits, paid for ideally by lower public expenditure. So I think a steady budget would serve us best globally. India is fortunate amongst all the emerging economies at the moment to be one of the steadiest emerging economies. It is vital that we retain that because then the costs of the US imposing unilaterally tariffs or other constraints on us would be that much higher since we're the only stable, steady, democratic emerging economy at present on this planet.
Yes,
I mean, just add a point here, since from the domestic perspective, but however, we also have another jurisdiction called gift jurisdiction.
Yes.
And now a lot of transactions, a lot of money has started moving into this. And but when the money moves in and out of the country, it tends to move directly back to Singapore or to Hong Kong. It needs to rest in gift. And gift possibly, maybe it's my wish, someday a separate chapter in our tax code gets written for that. So that there's a tax stability assurance in the mind. Today is through that ACZ rules and so on and so forth. That would set the ball rolling because there's a lot of HNI investors, there's a lot of others, there's a lot of PE funds who are setting up their base there.
I'm sure that this is feedback that has been sent to the government. Have you heard anything on whether this is even an active consideration?
We can only hear today.
we'll only hear today.
But that's a wish, and I guess that those kind of feedback must have been gone, and I'm sure maybe a lot of things are work in progress always.
I would not be politically comfortable with this happening with gift. There's already too much talk about Gujarati oligarchies. And this would only add to that.
Okay. Well, gentlemen, I'm going to have to ask you to take a pause because the finance minister rising in parliament to present budget 2025. This is going to be her 8th budget, 8th consecutive budget. On CNBC TV 18, we're calling it Seize the Moment. Will the budget capture the global context as well as unleash the animal spirits of the domestic industry? That's the big question. That is the action from Lok Sabha, the Speaker calling the House to order. And in just a moment from now, you will see Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman rise to present the Union budget.
सदस्यगण, बजट के बाद राज्यपाल अभिभाषण में आपको पर्याप्त अवसर दूंगा। मेरा आपसे निवेदन है, नहीं माननीय अखिलेश जी, आपने संसद की मर्यादा को आप बना के रखें। कभी बजट भाषण के अंदर इस तरीके का नहीं हुआ, ये उचित नहीं है, ये उचित नहीं है। अखिलेश जी प्लीज, मैं आपको मौका दूंगा राज्यपाल अभिभाषण पे, प्लीज। नो, ये तरीका ठीक नहीं है। नो, राज्यपाल अभिभाषण पे चर्चा होगी। नो तरीका।
Honorable Speaker, I present the budget for 25-26. This budget continues our government's efforts to A. Accelerate growth, B. Secure inclusive development, C. Invigorate private sector investments, D. Uplift household sentiments, and E. Enhance spending power of India's rising middle class. Together, we embark on a journey to unlock our nation's tremendous potential for greater prosperity and global positioning under the leadership of Honorable Prime Minister Shri Narendra Modi. As we complete the first quarter of the 21st century, continuing geopolitical headwinds suggest lower global economic growth over the medium term. However, our aspiration for a Vikasit Bharat inspires us, and the transformative work we have done during our government's first 2 terms guides us to march forward resolutely. Our economy is the fastest growing among all major economies. Our development track record for the past 10 years and structural reforms have drawn global attention. Confidence in India's capability and potential has only grown in this period. We see the next 5 years as a unique opportunity to realize Sabka Vikas, stimulating balanced growth of all regions. The great Telugu poet and playwright Gurujada Apparao had said, Deshamante matti kadoy, Deshamante manushuloy, meaning a country is not just its a country is its people. In line with this, for us, Vikasit Bharat encompasses zero poverty, 100% quality good school education, access to high quality, affordable and comprehensive healthcare, 100% skilled labor with meaningful employment, 70% women in economic activities, and farmers making our country the food basket of the world. In this budget, the proposed development measures span 10 broad areas, focusing on Garib, youth, Annadata, and Nari, spurring agricultural growth and productivity, building rural prosperity and resilience, taking everyone together on an inclusive growth path, boosting manufacturing and furthering Make in India, supporting MSMEs, enabling employment-led development, investing in people, economy, and innovation, securing energy supplies, promoting exports, and nurturing innovation. For this journey of development, our four powerful engines are agriculture, MSME, investments, and exports. The fuel, our reforms, our guiding spirit, inclusivity, and the destination, Vikasit Bharat. This budget aims to initiate transformative reforms across 6 domains. During the first 5 years, these will augment our growth potential and global competitiveness. The domains are taxation, power sector, urban development, mining, financial sector, and regulatory reforms. Agriculture as the first engine. Now I move to specific proposals, beginning with agriculture as the first engine. Prime Minister Dhan Dhanya Krishi Yojana, developing agri-districts program. Motivated by the success of the aspirational district program, our government will undertake a Prime Minister Dhan Dhanya Krishi Yojana in partnership with states. Through the convergence of existing schemes and specialized measures, the program will cover 100 districts with low productivity, moderate crop intensity, and below average credit parameters. It aims to 1. Enhance agricultural productivity, 2. Adopt crop diversification and sustainable agricultural practices, 3. Augment post-harvest storage at the panchayat and block level, 4. Improve irrigation facilities, and 5. Facilitate availability of long-term and short-term credit. This program is likely to help 1.7 crore farmers. Building rural prosperity and resilience. A comprehensive multi-sectoral rural prosperity and resilience program will be launched in partnership with the states. This will address underemployment in agriculture through skilling, investment, technology, and invigorating the rural economy. The goal is to generate ample opportunities in rural areas so that migration is an option but not a necessity. The program will focus on rural women, young farmers, rural youth, marginal and small farmers, and landless families. The details are in Annexure A. Domestic best practices will be incorporated, and appropriate technical and financial assistance will be sought from multilateral development banks. In phase 1, 100 developing agri-districts will be covered. Atmanirbharta in pulses. Our government is implementing the National Mission for Edible Oilseed for achieving Atmanirbharta in edible oils. Our farmers have the capability to grow enough for our needs and more. 10 years ago, we made concerted efforts and succeeded in achieving near self-sufficiency in pulses. Farmers responded to the need by increasing the cultivated area by 50%, and government arranged for procurement and remunerative prices. Since then, with rising incomes and better affordability, our consumption of pulses has increased significantly. Our government will now launch a 6-year mission for Atmanirbharta in pulses with a special focus on Tuar, Urad and Masoor. Details are in Annexure B. Central agencies such as NAFED and NCCF will ready